Tonight's story is the story of Ethiopia, the land of origins, the land of light. A country where the threads of human history are woven deeper than almost anywhere else on earth. Rest now, for the night embraces you. The stars are above, the hush of ancient highlands surrounds us. Let your imagination unfold like parchment by candlelight, and drift back with me, far, far back in time. Before kings and queens, before temples and dynasties, there was the earth itself. In the valleys of Ethiopia, in the shifting soils of the Great Rift, walked one of the earliest ancestors of humankind. She is known to us now as Lucy, though her true name, given in Amharic, is Dinkanesh. You are marvelous. More than 3 million years ago, her delicate bones were carried by the winds of time into the present, where scientists uncovered her resting place in the Awashed Valley. Her presence tells us that humanity itself, our shared story, began here beneath Ethiopian skies. As you breathe, imagine those early plains, warm sunlight, the hum of insects, the rustle of grasses taller than a person, and the steady, eternal footsteps of our ancestors. Ethiopia has always been a land touched by myth as much as reality. Its story is whispered in the scriptures of Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. The Queen of Sheba, known in Ethiopian tradition as Makeda, is said to have traveled to Jerusalem, to the court of King Solomon, carrying with her the wealth of incense, gold, and ivory. She returned in the story carrying not only treasures, but also a child, Mentelik, who would become the first emperor of Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty. Said to have descended directly from King Solomon and Makeda herself. That bloodline, real or mythic, gave Ethiopian rulers their aura of divine legitimacy for centuries. And within Ethiopian lore, it is believed that the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest of the Israelites, was brought by Menelik to Ethiopia, where it is still said to rest in the northern city of Aksum, in a small chapel guarded day and night, never to be seen by ordinary eyes. Whether true or not, the legend breathes mystery into the air, like incense filling a darkened church. But before the grandeur of kingdoms, the highlands were shaped by simpler lives. Early people raised cattle, cultivated grains, and carved their way into the terraces of the mountains. The land itself is rugged, yet nurturing. The high plateaus capture rain, and rivers carve deep valleys, creating fertile ground. To this day, tephra, tiny grain used to make spongy, comforting injera bread, has been grown in Ethiopia for thousands of years. Imagine the warmth of bread rising on stone griddles, the smell of smoke in the cold air of the highlands. Families gathering under grass-roofed homes, while outside, winds curled around the hillsides like soft whispers. In those early centuries before Christ, a kingdom called Mount rose in northern Ethiopia near the Red Sea coast. Its people built temples of stone, their walls decorated with South Arabian inscriptions, showing the ties of trade and culture that connected Ethiopia with the wider world across the sea. Mount thrived on agriculture, using irrigation and terracing to tame the land. The people there were early masters of blending African traditions with Arabian influences, blending faiths and customs, weaving a society both practical and spiritual. Yet, like a candle's flame, Mount flickered and disappeared, leaving little but ruins and mystery. Still, the stage had been set for one of the greatest civilizations of Africa, the kingdom of Aksum. Breathe slowly, for we will walk gently into its story. The Aksumite kingdom, emerging around the 1st century CE, was a marvel of its age. Its capital, Aksum, was a city alive with markets, camels loaded with spices, ivory from Africa's interior, and glassware from distant Rome. Traders spoke in many tongues. The Red Sea was not a boundary, but a bridge, carrying ships to India, Arabia, and beyond. In the heart of the city rose towering steely carved obelisks of solid granite, some soaring as high as 24 meters. They stood as grave markers, monuments of power. Their surfaces etched with symbolic doors and windows, as if the stone itself was a house for eternity. Imagine the workers chiseling carefully under the sun, pulling ropes, singing chants as the monoliths were raised. To this day, some still stand, silent and unmoving, watching centuries pass like drifting clouds. The Aksumites did something few in Africa had attempted before. They minted their own coins. Gold, silver, and bronze coins carried the images of kings, marked with crosses or the discant crescent of earlier faiths. These coins traveled far across trade routes, proof that Aksum was no isolated land, but a power recognized by empires from Rome to India. To hold one of these coins would be to feel the weight of history itself in your hand. Small, yet eternal. And perhaps the most enduring transformation of Aksum came under King Azana in the 4th century. Azana looked to the north, to the empire of Byzantium, and to the missionaries who whispered of a new faith. He became one of the first rulers in the world to embrace Christianity, making Ethiopia one of the earliest Christian nations on earth. Crosses replaced crescent moons on coins. Churches began to rise, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, with its haunting chants and illuminated manuscripts, its processions wrapped in white robes and incense smoke, was born. The faith became the heartbeat of Ethiopia, woven into its art, its music, its stories, its very identity. As night deepens around us, imagine the flicker of oil lamps inside a church carved into rock. The walls glow faintly with painted saints, their eyes large and calm. A priest chants softly in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language that has survived for centuries. Outside, the wind brushes across the highlands, carrying echoes of prayers and time itself. The kingdom of Aksum, though mighty, was not eternal. Over centuries, shifting trade routes, the rise of Islam along the Red Sea, and perhaps even environmental changes weakened its power. But the story of Ethiopia did not fit it, only transformed, carried forward like an ember glowing in the dark. The decline of Aksum was not sudden, but slow and quiet, like the fading of twilight into night. The Red Sea, once an open road of commerce, grew crowded with new powers. Islamic caliphates controlled the trade ports, redirecting wealth away. Aksum's hills and valleys still held people, still whispered prayers, but the grandeur of its empire waned. By the 7th century, the city that once rivaled Rome stood quieter. Its steely still, upright, but its palaces echoing with emptiness. Yet Ethiopia's heart was never broken. It retreated inward to its highlands, where faith and tradition became its fortress. From this retreat grew a new dynasty, the Zag, for centuries. From about the 12th to the 13th, the Zag kings ruled a land more focused on piety than conquest. Their most enduring legacy is carved not upon paper or stone stele, but into the very mountains themselves. In the small town of Lalibela, a cluster of churches still stands, hewn directly into volcanic rock. Each church was not built, but carved downward, as if the earth itself was sculpted into sanctuaries. Imagine workers chiseling by hand, day after day, lowering themselves deeper until walls of rock became walls of sacred space. Passageways connect the churches, tunnels and trenches, weaving a labyrinth where pilgrims walk in silence. By lantern light, the red tufa stone glows warmly, as though the churches breathe with life. Legend says King Lalibela received a vision, a command to create a new Jerusalem in Ethiopia, a holy city for those who could not travel to the real Jerusalem in distant lands. The churches bear biblical names: Bet Mahan, Alem, the house of the Savior; Bet Mariam, the house of Mary; Bet Georgis, the house of St. George, with its perfect cross-shaped roof carved into the earth. To walk there, even in imagination, is to step into a dream where heaven and earth blur. Priests, wrapped in white, still chant there, their voices echoing in the stone chambers. Incense curling upward through carved windows to the stars. The Zagi dynasty was deeply tied to the church. Manuscripts were illuminated with rich pigment threads, blues and golds painted upon parchment. Hymns and prayers in jiyas carried faith through the centuries. Monks lived in mountain caves, keeping vigil by candlelight, copying words that would survive long after empires had fallen. Yet, while the Zag kings built their holy legacy, their claim to power was often questioned. They were seen by some as outsiders, not direct heirs of Solomon. This tension would eventually bring about their fall. By the 13th century, the Solomonic dynasty emerged, claiming descent from Mendelik, son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Their rise was not merely political, it was a restoration of Ethiopia's mythical origin, reaffirming the nation's place as chosen, ancient, eternal. For centuries, Solomonic emperors ruled, carrying titles of the Lion of Judah. Their authority wrapped not only in military might, but in sacred ancestry. During these medieval centuries, Ethiopia faced waves of challenge and renewal. To the east, Islamic sultanates rose, especially the Sultanate of Ifat and later Adel. Trade and warfare intertwined, as Ethiopian kings sought to expand their Christian highlands, while Muslim states controlled the lowlands and trade routes to the sea. Yet, conflict also bred cultural blending. Arabic words entered Ethiopian speech. Islamic artistry influenced architecture, and markets bustled where faiths and peoples mingled under the same sun. One of the most vivid figures of this age was Ahmad ibn Ibrahim Ogazi, remembered in Ethiopian history as Ahmad Gragd, the left-handed. In the 1500s, his armies swept through Ethiopia, armed with firearms provided by the Ottoman Turks. Churches burned, manuscripts were destroyed, and the Christian kingdom trembled. But just as shadows grew deepest, allies arrived. The Portuguese, drawn by shared faith and the hope of trade routes to India, sent musketeers and priests. The battles were fierce, smoke rising in the valleys. But eventually, Ethiopia prevailed. The Solomonic line endured, scarred yet unbroken. Amid these struggles, daily life carried on, quiet as candle flames. Farmers tended their teff and barley. Herders led cattle through narrow paths. Families told stories by firelight sagas of saints, of kings, of ancestors. Honey was treasured, not only as food, but as the base for tej, a golden honey wine still poured in tall glasses today, sweet and strong. Weaving and embroidery flourished, with crosses and patterns stitched into cloth. White robes gleaming in processions. Music flowed from crars. The lyre-like instruments, their strings plucked in rhythms that carried both sorrow and joy. It was during this period, too, that coffee, Ethiopia's gift to the world, began to spread. In the lush highlands of Kaffa, legend says a goat herd named Kaldi noticed his goats dancing, full of energy, after eating the red berries of a certain bush. Curious, He tried them himself, and soon coffee's invigorating secret was discovered. Monks used it to stay awake during long prayers, and over time, coffee became a ritual, a ceremony, a gift of warmth and wakefulness. Today, Ethiopia's coffee ceremony remains a slow, sacred act. Green beans roasted over flame, ground fresh, brewed 3 times. Each round poured into small cups as conversation flows. To sip coffee in Ethiopia is not just to drink, but to join in a timeless circle of hospitality. Ethiopia's emperors often looked outward, sending envoys to Europe, receiving Jesuit missionaries, balancing the desire for alliances with the need to preserve tradition. The Jesuits brought new ideas, but also tension, as some tried to impose Catholic doctrine on an Orthodox land. By the mid-1600s, Emperor Fasilides expelled the Jesuits, closing Ethiopia's doors to much of the outside world for centuries. Yet he left behind his own legacy, the city of Gondor. To this day, the ruins of those castles stand, their stone walls strong against time, their towers echoing with the footsteps of forgotten courts. Within their halls, emperors held banquets, scribes recorded decrees, musicians played for kings and queens. Gondor was not only political, but cultural, a place where art and music blossomed, where monasteries thrived, where the air was filled with chants and bells. As night deepens, imagine yourself wandering Gondar's castle grounds under moonlight. Stone arches cast shadows, owls stir in the rafters, and the faint echo of footsteps from centuries past follows softly behind. The history of Ethiopia lingers here, not in silence, but in whispers. By the 18th century, Gondor, once bright with music and scribes, began to waver under the weight of internal rivalries. Instead, regional nobles grew powerful, carving Ethiopia into smaller realms. This period, known as the Zemen Mesafintha era of the princes, was a time when Ethiopia's throne was more symbolic than real, as warlords and local lords controlled the land. Imagine valleys filled with the clash of rival banners. While in mountain monasteries, monks still kept to their chants, the outside world falling away beyond the walls of painted churches. Yet Ethiopia, though divided, endured. Its people held fast to their traditions, the Orthodox faith, the spoken stories, the coffee ceremonies that bound neighbors together. Even in times of turmoil, life pulsed, steadily plowing fields, weaving cloth, carving prayers into parchment, whispering old tales by firelight. And from this fracturing rose a figure of immense presence, Emperor Teodros II. In the mid-1800s, he dreamed of uniting Ethiopia, again, of forging a centralized kingdom that could resist foreign encroachment. Teodros was fierce, passionate, sometimes merciless. He built castles of his own at Magdala dreamed of casting cannons and modernizing his army. But his reign was marked by conflict, both within Ethiopia and with the outside world. His interactions with Britain led, tragically, to the 1868 British expedition against him, ending with his death. Yet, even in his fall, Tewodros left behind the spark of a unity ember that would ignite under his successors. That ember flared in Emperor Johannes IV, and then blazed in the reign of Emperor Menelik II. Menelik is remembered as one of Ethiopia's most celebrated rulers, a man who carried Ethiopia into modernity without surrendering its independence. His capital, Addis Ababa, founded in the late 1800s, was laid upon the rolling highlands, its name meaning new flower. Even today, Addis blooms as the heart of Ethiopia. But perhaps Menelik's most eternal legacy is found on a battlefield. The battle in 1896, Italy, eager to expand its colonial empire, sought to make Ethiopia a protectorate. Treaties were twisted, translations disputed, and soon armies marched. The world expected Ethiopia, like so many other African nations, to fall under European conquest. But Menelik, gathering his nobles and generals, rallied the people. From every corner of Ethiopia, they came warriors on horseback, peasants with spears, nobles with rifles, priests carrying crosses. The mountains echoed with the sound of drums, the chanting of prayers, the neighing of horses. At Adwa, under the rising sun, Ethiopian forces met the Italians in a clash that shook history. The battle was fierce, dust rising into the air, shouts and gunfire mingling with the cries of men. And when the dust settled, Ethiopia had triumphed. The Italian army was broken, its dream of colonization shattered. For the first time in modern history, an African nation had defeated a European empire in open battle. The victory at Adwa became a beacon, a symbol across the continent and the world. Ethiopia stood proud, unconquered, sovereign. This triumph was more than military. It carried deep spiritual and cultural weight. Across Africa, peoples still under colonial rule looked to Ethiopia as proof that freedom was possible. Among the African diaspora in the Americas and the Caribbean, Ethiopia became a symbol of pride, a motherland unbowed. Even in churches and spiritual movements, Ethiopia was named in prayers, a land of prophecy and resilience. Under Menelik, Ethiopia also modernized. Telegraph lines stretched across the land, roads were built, education encouraged. His empress, Tetu Betel, was herself a formidable figure strategist at Adwa. The founder of Addis Ababa, remembered for her wisdom and strength. Together, they anchored Ethiopia in both tradition and change, in both faith and progress. As the 19th century faded into the 20th, Ethiopia faced new winds of challenge. Menelik's successor, Ieyasu, sought reform but was overthrown. Seen as too sympathetic to Islam in a dominantly Christian empire. In 1930, a new ruler was crowned, Emperor Haile Selassie I, the Lion of Judah, whose reign would carry Ethiopia onto the global stage. Haile Selassie was regal, visionary, and deeply conscious of Ethiopia's role in history. Under his gaze, Ethiopia modernized further. Schools opened. A written constitution was established. Ethiopia reached out diplomatically to the world. He traveled abroad, presenting Ethiopia not as a distant, ancient land, but as a nation, alive and present in modern affairs. But shadows gathered once more. In 1935, Mussolini's fascist Italy invaded Ethiopia, seeking revenge for Adwa and a colonial empire in East Africa. Planes dropped bombs, even chemical weapons scorched the land. Yet resistance flared in every valley. Patriots, farmers, monks, and nobles all rose to defend their homeland. Though Addis Ababa fell, Ethiopia's spirit did not. Haile Selassie fled into exile, but even abroad, he raised his voice. At the League of Nations in Geneva, he stood, dignified, addressing the world in words that still echo. It is us today. It will be you tomorrow. His plea for collective security went unheeded, yet it planted seeds for what would one day become the United Nations. After 5 years of occupation with the help of Allied forces during World War II, Ethiopia was liberated in 1941. Haile Selassie returned, his throne restored. Ethiopia was once again free, the only African nation never colonized, its sovereignty intact despite the scars of war. Yet Haile Selassie was more than emperor. To many, he was messianic. In Jamaica, a movement grew, the Rastafari, who saw him as the living embodiment of prophecy, the Lion of Judah, the returned king. Ethiopia, through Haile Selassie, became a spiritual homeland for people thousands of miles away, a source of hope and divine connection. His image, crowned and serene, spread in songs, in prayers, in the smoke of incense and the rhythm of drums. As night deepens around us, imagine the glow of Addis Ababa in Haile Selassie, electric light mingling with candle flames. Modern boulevards alive with cars, yet still framed by mountains, timeless as eternity. The old and the new, the ancient and the modern, intertwined seamlessly. Just as Ethiopia itself has always held together myth and memory, faith and survival. The years following Ethiopia's liberation in 1941 were filled with hope. Yet they were also heavy with challenge. Haile Selassie worked tirelessly to strengthen Ethiopia's institutions, to weave the fabric of a modern state from threads both ancient and new. Roads expanded across the highlands. Schools filled with eager students. Hospitals tended to the sick, and newspapers carried the pulse of global affairs into the hands of readers. Haile Selassie also sought to anchor Ethiopia within the broader world. In 1963, Addis Ababa became the birthplace of the Organization of African Unity, gathering of independent African states. A dream realized in stone halls and echoing speeches. Ethiopia, untouched by colonial rule, held the symbolic power to host such a union. Leaders from across the continent came, their voices carried on the cool breeze of the plateau, pledging solidarity in the struggles ahead. Even today, Addis remains home to the African Union. Yet, beneath this proud surface, discontent stirred. Ethiopia was still a land of deep contrasts. Modern schools in the cities, but rural villages where oxen still plowed the soil as they had for thousands of years. A modern constitution on paper, but a society where vast estates remained in the hands of nobles, while peasants struggled with drought and hunger. Haile Selassie, though admired as a statesman, was often seen as distant. An emperor of great dignity, but perhaps less attuned to the rumbling disquiet of his people. In 1973, a terrible famine struck Ethiopia, particularly in Wallo and Tigray. Fields withered, rains failed, and people starved, while grain was still exported abroad. Images of suffering spread to the world, shocking viewers and fueling anger at home. In the same year, Haile Selassie celebrated his 80th birthday with ceremony and grandeur. But the contrast between palace feasts and rural starvation became too stark to ignore. By 1974, discontent boiled over. Soldiers, students, and workers rose in revolt. The monarchy, once seen as eternal, was toppled. Haile Selassie, the Lion of Judah, was deposed after more than 4 decades on the throne. He died under mysterious circumstances in 1975, his legacy at once revered and contested. For many, he remained a visionary, a father of modern Africa. For others, he symbolized a system that had not kept pace with the needs of the people. Yet, in the hearts of the Rastafari and in the prayers of millions, his name endured. Haile Selassie, the conquering lion. With his fall came the rise of the Derg, a military committee that seized power and declared Ethiopia a socialist state. The Derg, led by Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam, promised equality, land reform, and revolution. But their rule soon became one of the darkest chapters in Ethiopia's story. The Derg redistributed land, ending centuries of feudal ownership, yet their reforms came with brutal repression. Suspected opponents were executed, dissent crushed, fear spreading like a shadow over the highlands and valleys. In the late 1970s, Ethiopia was further shaken by the Red Terror, a campaign of violence that claimed tens of thousands of lives. Families whispered in silence, doors shut tightly at night, while posters of revolutionary slogans clung to the walls of Addis Ababa. The hum of the city was heavy with tension, the once celebrated revolution turning into a weight of sorrow. And beyond repression came famine once more. The mid-1980s brought drought and devastation, compounded by war and mismanagement. Images of starving children, of cracked earth and hollowed eyes spread across the world, sparking one of the largest humanitarian responses in modern history. Songs were sung, concerts held, aid flown in from faraway nations. Ethiopia's suffering became global news, yet, for its people, it was not headlines, but daily struggle, the harsh reality of survival. Through these years, Ethiopia also faced wars within and without. The Ogaden War in the late 1970s saw Ethiopia clash with Somalia over the desert borderlands, a conflict fueled by Cold War rivalries, with Soviet and American powers pulling strings in the background. Inside Ethiopia, resistance movements grew, most notably the Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF), and others who fought against the Derg's rule from the mountains and countryside. By 1991, the tide had turned. The Derg collapsed, Mengistu fled into exile, and a coalition of rebel groups took power. Ethiopia entered yet another new chapter, the era of the Federal Democratic Republic. Ethnic federalism was established, giving autonomy to Ethiopia's diverse regions. The old empire was gone, the socialist state dissolved, and in its place rose a fragile but hopeful republic. Yet even as Ethiopia stepped into the modern age, its story remained one of resilience and complexity. In 1993, Eritrea, once part of Ethiopia, voted for independence, becoming a new nation on the Red Sea. The loss of Eritrea meant Ethiopia became landlocked, its long history of maritime trade severed from the coast. Still, life pulsed on. Cities grew, villages endured, and the rhythm of daily rituals, coffee, music, prayer continued. The late 20th and early 21st centuries saw Ethiopia transform again. Skyscrapers began to rise in Addis Ababa, trains and highways stretched across the highlands, and the ancient land of emperors entered the global age. But challenges persisted. Poverty, political unrest, ethnic conflict, and the lingering scars of famine and war. Yet, Ethiopia's cultural heartbeat never faded. Its music, rich with lilting rhythms and soulful voices, carried its spirit across the world. Its cuisine, injera with spicy stews, became beloved far beyond its borders. Its athletes, runners like Abibi Bikila, who won Olympic gold barefoot, and Haile Selassie, who set world records, showed the strength of highland endurance. And always the old symbols remained: the cross of Lalibela, the echo of the Blue Nile, the songs of faith that stretched back 1,000 years. Through sorrow and triumph, through emperors and generals, through famine and celebration, Ethiopia has endured. Like its highland mountains, it stands unshaken, its history etched into stone churches and flowing rivers. Its people carrying forward the legacy of one of humanity's most ancient homelands. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, Ethiopia stood at a crossroads. The new federal republic sought stability after decades of upheaval. Addis Ababa became a city of contrast, ancient churches with flickering candles standing side by side with new concrete towers, dusty open markets buzzing beside polished office blocks. The hum of modernity mingled with the whisper of the past. Ethiopia's economy began to grow rapidly, among the fastest in Africa. Roads stretched further into the countryside. A new light rail glided through the heart of Addis, and the skies filled with the wings of Ethiopian Airlines, carrying the nation's name across continents. For many, this airline became a point of pride, its silver planes lifting from the high plateau, bridging Ethiopia with the wider world. Yet, modern Ethiopia was not free of struggle. Ethnic divisions, given structure by the system of federalism, sometimes deepened into rivalry and unrest. In 1998, Ethiopia and Eritrea, once bound as one, were drawn into a bitter border war, fought across dusty plains where trenches cut scars into the land. Tens of thousands perished, and though peace would eventually be declared, the tension lingered for decades. Still, even in the shadow of war, Ethiopia's cultural light glowed. Music halls in Addis filled with the vibrant sound of Ethiopias, pioneered by musicians like Malatu S. Takia, dreamy fusion of African rhythms and smoky jazz that carried Ethiopia's soul to the world stage, brimmed with the aroma of roasting coffee beans as the coffee ceremony, unchanged for centuries, remained a ritual of togetherness. Guests sat quietly as green beans cracked and hissed in the pan. Incense drifted through the air, and tiny cups of dark, rich buna were passed around, one after another, like a shared heartbeat. In 2010, construction began on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam along the Blue Nile, the mightiest river that begins in Ethiopia's highlands. To some, it was a symbol of rebirth, of a nation harnessing its waters to bring light and power to millions. To others, it stirred tension as neighboring countries worried over its impact downstream. Yet in the quiet villages near the Nile, farmers watched the rising dam with awe, a sign that Ethiopia's ancient river was stepping into the modern world. In 2018, a new leader rose to power, Abiy Ahmed, who sought to bring reform, peace, and renewal. His efforts to make peace with Eritrea, once unthinkable after years of hostility, earned him the Nobel Peace Prize. For a moment, hope seemed to fill the air like fresh rain after a long drought. But peace is fragile, and Ethiopia's history has never been without turbulence. In 2020, conflict broke out in Tigray, a war that carried echoes of old divisions and tested the resilience of the nation once more. Yet even amid hardship, Ethiopia's identity as one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations remained unshaken. It was there in the carved crosses of Lalibela, in the chants rising from monasteries on remote mountaintops, in the legends of the Ark of the Covenant. Set to rest in Aksum, it was there in the proud faces of runners who carried Ethiopia's flag around Olympic tracks, in the stories of farmers who coaxed life from dry soil, and in the quiet pride of elders who told the sagas of kings and queens by the glow of kerosene lamps. Modern Ethiopia is a place of many layers, of bustling innovation and timeless ritual, of unity and division, of sorrow and triumph. Its history flows not in a straight line, but like the Nile itself, branching, winding, sometimes turbulent, always enduring. And through it all, Ethiopia holds a special place in the human story. For it is one of our earliest homelands, a cradle where humanity first stood upright and walked into the world. As night deepens around us, imagine the land itself, the high plateau under a silver moon, the faint rustle of wind through the tall grasses, the glow of hearth fires in distant villages. Imagine the endless layers of history that rests beneath the soil fossils of ancient ancestors. Stones of ancient kingdoms, relics of emperors, and the quiet prayers of countless generations. Ethiopia's story is not finished, and perhaps it never will be. It is eternal, stretching backward into the dawn of humankind, forward into the uncertain dreams of tomorrow. And now, as your eyes grow heavy, let that story cradle you like the soft flow of the Nile, like the hush of the highland night. You are safe, you are warm, and time itself is carrying you gently into rest.